Perfect. All right, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Okay, Shayna says I use Stardust mostly just for the vibes. I totally get it. Still looking for more education on what to actually look at. Incredible. Everybody, I was saying, if you are curious about an app or tracker, using an app or tracker, drop it in and I will gear this toward you. But we do have a lot today, so I definitely want to jump in. So, who this is for? Well, I created this because basically everyone I talk to in the women's health space or is curious about the women's health space, period, menstrual health, fertility, we all tend to be a little obsessive, but very health conscious. You're probably highly educated. You have just crushed it in every area of life. And then we get to this topic that is so intimate, so connected to who we are, and we kind of have no idea how to approach it. So, this is essentially exposing you to a way of thinking, a method that allows you to work with your body no matter your goal. So, be it TTC, be it just trying to be as healthy as possible, be it birth control, and you don't want to be on hormonal birth control, this is the spot for you. So, usually you're incredibly well researched already, highly educated, like I said, but feel so dumb. This is something I hear all the time. Like, I know so much about this, or I try to, but I still feel so dumb. And I relate. So, this will serve as a mini introduction for those of you that don't know me. I'm a scientist by training. I have a bachelor's in human biology. I have a master's in nutrition science from Tufts University. I've been in personalized wellness, biotech industry for the past 7 years. I am the director of science at Inside Tracker, and I'm also a menstrual and fertility health practitioner. Now, I say all of that because even though I graduated with those degrees, and even though I've been just steeped in health and wellness, reading all these papers, on top of all the latest insights and discoveries and information, know the best people in the field. I didn't know jack shit about my own period. I suffered from horrible cramps, undiagnosed endometriosis my entire teen years, had horrible, severe hormonal acne, and was just given, the advice to take Advil and get on birth control, which I did for a period of time. But despite all the education and all the privilege I had, I did not feel prepared or educated or informed in any way when it came to women's health and cycle tracking for birth control, not wanting to be on hormonal birth control anymore, and also like approaching future fertility. So, if that's you, you're very much in the right place. Okay, so we have a clue girl, fantastic. Natural cycles will be open to shifting to another method in the future, perfect. I use natural cycles in Moody mostly to know when my period is coming, but definitely want to see how else these apps incorporate more helpful info. Love it. Co-founder of Dot Days, amazing, an app that uses nutrition science to alleviate cycle symptoms. We love that. Nutrition is very much involved in all of this, and currently using the Daisy device. Okay, beautiful, guys. Thank you for the really helpful information. So, before we dive into any of the apps and devices and trackers and the pros and cons and how they work, it is so critical for me to give a very high, quick overview of how fertility actually works. And if you're not interested in fertility specifically, I don't mean this as in if you're trying to conceive. I mean this as in how our biology has worked since puberty until menopause. So I find that most people don't get this foundation. This is going to tell you, this very information is going to let you draw the conclusions of what is the biological underpinning of what a lot of these apps are doing. Are they collecting the information they need to give you insights and practical adjustments and, safe days, not safe days that you can trust? So I always like to compare and contrast. Men are fertile 24/7. Whereas women, we are only fertile 6 days per cycle. Now, this is very jarring to a lot of people who it was drilled into us, have unprotected sex, get pregnant, and die from a very young age. Like we thought every time you were having sex, you were risking pregnancy. And cut to, you get a little older and you realize how this works, and that's absolutely not true. We really only have this window of 6 days tops each and every cycle. So, ovulation is the star of the menstrual cycle. Really, it should be called like the ovulatory cycle. We call it the menstrual cycle, but the point isn't to menstruate. The point is to ovulate. Ovulation itself is a 1 day event, and it can only happen once per cycle. The egg only survives 12 to 24 hours. So if you think about it, we have this 6-day fertile window. Ovulation is only 1 day of that. The egg is only going to live for 12 to 24 hours. So really, like knowing when this happens is going to be critical either to avoid it or to target it wherever you are in your reproductive journey. The reason we have a 5 to 6 day fertile window when ovulation is only a 1 day event is because of cervical fluid. So you'll hear me talk about this a lot. Cervical mucus or cervical fluid is a primary fertile sign. And what this does is the presence of it allows sperm to survive up to 5 days and chill. Essentially, there are little crypts in your cervix, little sperm hotels, if you will, that when cervical mucus is present and you have unprotected sex, they can chill there for up to 5 days and await a potentially ovulated egg. So that gives us 5 days before ovulation, where sperm can stay alive and wait for the egg, and the day of ovulation itself, in which unprotected sex can lead to pregnancy. That's it. So, this is a very simplistic overview of a cycle, but if you start from day one, which is the first day of your period, and up until, as your period ends, up until you start seeing fertile cervical fluid, this is when we call relatively infertile, which I'll come back to. I know that's very confusing, but you have this 5 day fertile window where you're producing cervical mucus, where sperm, like I said, can chill in the hotels, wait for this egg when it gets ovulated. Ovulation itself happens. It's a 1 day event. Egg will live for 12 to 24 hours. Once the egg has left the building, you are infertile. So we enter this luteal phase, so post-ovulatory infertile phase. So once you confirm ovulation happened, and there are very clear ways we can do that, this is an infertile phase. So going back to pre-ovulatory, the space between, you get your period and then you enter your fertile window. Why do I call this relatively infertile? Because these days are guilty until proven innocent. This is not a court of law. It is the opposite. So this space of the cycle is where all the risk essentially of unintended pregnancy lies. If you do not identify the opening of your fertile window through your own body signs, because our body is always giving us feedback on this, we have the ability to understand based on primary fertile signs, which I'll explain to you what they are. Is today a fertile day? Yes or no? If you answer yes, then you know. If you answer no, that's why we say these days are guilty until proven innocent. So you have to know what you're looking for. And if you're relying on an app or a predictive algorithm that isn't taking your own fertile signs into account, this is where it can screw you over. So this is what, like, I usually spend a lot more time explaining the menstrual cycle and the biology of it and the hormones at play, but because I know you're here for a full device breakdown, I have plenty of other events on that I can send you if you're interested. Um, we're going to leave that here. Ask questions if anything wasn't clear, but I want to get to all of the different ways that you guys may be tracking. So those fertile signs that I was talking about, what are they? We have three. We have basal body temperature. If you've ever seen people, taking their temperature or attaching their wearables, that's essentially what this is, either measuring directly or algorithmically adjusting. We have cervical fluid, another primary fertile sign. And we have cervical position. Now, the basal body temperature and cervical fluid, these you can do externally. You don't have to go digging for anything. Cervical position, you do have to do an internal check. So just to be really clear on how you find these things out. So when I say know if every single day is a fertile day for you, we use these signs as proxies for our major reproductive hormones. And what we're looking at, the key ones during the menstrual cycle, or ovulatory cycle, are estrogen and progesterone. So again, this is high level, but I love this visual here and I want to walk you through it because I say things like follicular development, estrogen levels, cervical position, cervical mucus, basal body temperature, and it sounds like they're all disconnected. It sounds like now, oh my gosh, I have all these different things to keep an eye on. I don't want you to think about it that way. These are actually all telling the exact same story. And Really, again, high level, what's happening with your two primary reproductive hormones, I mentioned estrogen and progesterone. In the first, we'll split the cycle into two parts, pre-ovulation and post-ovulation. So from the first day of your period until you ovulate, estrogen is rising in a healthy cycle. And the increase in estrogen is mediated by the development of the follicles in your ovary. So when you're having your period, that new cohort of eggs is already starting to grow. And they're kind of competing because that dominant egg is the one that's going to be ovulated. So what these are doing as they're growing is they are kicking out estrogen. And the more and more estrogen we kick out, the closer to ovulation we get. That is going to be the reason why the cervix starts producing cervical fluid. And the higher the estrogen concentration, this changes what you see. So earlier on, it might be more creamy, pasty, tacky, whitish. And then the closer you get to ovulation, the more estrogen there is in this fluid. And that's when it gets to that really classic egg white, lubricative, slippery, clear mucus that we associate with, I hate more or less fertile. I think that's a logical fallacy. But really what it means is, ovulation is pending. It's quite close because of the estrogen concentration inside the cervical mucus, which you're going to be able to classify differently than the earlier stuff, which might not have as much estrogen in it. So we ovulate, the dominant egg leaves the ovary, gets swept up by the fallopian tube, and then when that happens, we make progesterone. Now, it's critical to know that you do not make progesterone unless you ovulate. Why? Because the structure that the egg leaves behind when it's left the ovary, that is responsible for the production of progesterone. So you're not going to see a progesterone rise. You're not going to get the, benefits of the progesterone buffing estrogen if you don't ovulate. So what progesterone also does is it increases our basal metabolic rate. So our temperature gets higher. So this is really why people are taking their temperature, because if you see a sustained thermal shift, you know you've ovulated and you're making sufficient progesterone levels for your temperature to change. Now, the length of time, this is again, I don't want to get too complicated, but the life cycle of this corpus luteum is about 12 to 14 days. So you want to see this phase of your cycle, this post-ovulatory phase, be around 12 to 14 days. If it's any less, this is indicating progesterone insufficiency because the corpus luteum was not healthy enough to maintain. How that affects your cervical fluid is that when there's a high degree of progesterone present, essentially that does affect your cervical mucus, but what it does is it plugs it up. So it'll make a mucus plug here in the cervix. And you won't see, ideally, optimally, any post-ovulatory cervical fluid. So this is how it all works together. These are not separate things. These are all just different effects of the same hormonal story. So again, estrogen stimulates our cervix to make cervical mucus, causes the cervix to rise, soften, and open. So this is that cervical position shifting and changing that you would be looking for if you were doing the cervical position check. And then progesterone, we make this once we ovulate, this will raise our basal body temperature. So getting this right is all about pinpointing ovulation. If you're tracking for birth control or for trying to conceive, you need to know when this fertile window is to successfully avoid or target pregnancy. Also, like no matter what your goal is, ovulation is a absolute marker of health and longevity. This tells us that your body has enough resources and enough energy to direct to your most environmentally sensitive system. If anything is going wrong in any system in the body, like it's going to show up in your menstrual cycle. It's the biggest tattletale ever. So people think, oh, I'm working on my period. I have to do that, but I also have inflammation and metabolism issues and digestive trouble. That's all the same thing. It's all going to show up at the level of your reproductive system. So the only true way to know the exact point in time that you actually ovulate is if you were taking a daily ultrasound of your ovaries, which I don't know about you. I don't know about me. I know about me. That's never going to happen. So using our fertile signs is the next best thing. It's the next best thing we have. And guess what? It's free and you have access to it all the time. Unfortunately, many of these methods, the ones that we're going to talk about, are either A, using none of your fertile sign information to determine your fertile window, B, they're using one potentially, but they're not cross-referencing it against other fertile signs or taking other fertile signs into consideration and adjusting that algorithm. Or C, they're tracking quality information and you have these beautiful graphs, but you have no idea what to do with them. And then it's like, is this normal? If it's not, what do I do about it? Um, that we'll get to as well. So usually that's the three pain points I see across a lot of these really cool technologies and devices. So when you understand that underlying biology and how to figure it out for yourself, then you can properly evaluate every single tracker on the market. So let's start with apps because I know we have a bunch of app people here. This, I think, is the entry point for a lot of us. I definitely was a Flow user, back in my college days. So the ones I've highlighted are Flow and Clue because I know how they work, but many, many others are going to fall into this category. So, and you probably know from the name of this session, I've called it the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we're going to give you a very balanced take on all of these devices. So the good for the tracking apps is I love that they build awareness. They get you paying attention and you start collecting some very important pieces of information. So the two main ones are going to be, your average cycle length. That's incredibly important to know. Your period length, if it's getting you paying attention to the volume of your bleed, do you have spotting either before or after your period? You're probably paying attention to that. And then also some of them have really good symptom tracking. So can you sort of understand, when you're breaking out in your cycle or when you're bloating or when you have mood changes? Because that will tell you, are these hormonal at their base? So I love that. I think that this is an essential piece. This is the entryway into all the deeper, more advanced work. The bad. The bad is that they run on predictive algorithms. And the prediction is that they're going to forecast your current and future cycles based off the information provided from your previous cycles. This is rhythm method thinking. Now, I teach fertility awareness, and the language in the space is not great. But when people hear fertility awareness, this, I believe, is what a lot of the times they're thinking of, this kind of risky, crunchy, maybe religious undertones of this cycle prediction granola vibe. And that's not it at all. Rhythm method thinking, by definition, is using your past cycle information to predict your current and future ones. That's like saying, I always ovulate on day 15, so no matter what is happening in my life or with my health, day 15 is blocked off on my calendar because that's what it's always been. And that's just not how human beings work. That's not how your body works. Trust me. No matter how healthy you are, I promise you, you're not ovulating on the same day every day. And this is so problematic because it gives such a false sense of confidence. We actually know this to be true too. So, studies have been done where only 20% of women actually have even like a not pregnancy, sorry, textbook cycle where it's ovulation on day 14, 28 days long, like clockwork every single time. So, even though you may often have a 28-day cycle, this is a population average. So, it's a bell curve the numbers, converge at 28 days, but maybe it's 29, 30 days, maybe it's 26, 27 days. Like, again, we're relying on population averages and forecasting it onto you. So this is definitely not going to apply if you have any cycle red flags. So do you have irregular cycles where some months it's like 27 days, other cycles it's 45? And this irregularity will really throw off any of these predictive algorithms. Do you have extended bleeding, random spotting, things that make it really difficult for you to accurately log your period start and stop dates? And do you have really long cycles? Cycles over 35 days is the definition of, longer cycles. This is going to be extra hard for you because the algorithm is going to struggle. And usually it's going to be wrong with its predictions. So the ugly thing that I see about a lot of this, aside from what we just talked about, logging is not actually the same thing as tracking. And when I talk about tracking, it's because what we're doing is creating a feedback loop with you and your body. This is now a two-way conversation. This isn't me taking in information and trying to throw things back at it because I heard a good recommendation on a podcast or I saw this really cool thing online. This is me trying things, experiencing life, and then seeing how it shows up in my cycle back to me. Because I promise you, if you haven't had the gift of this yet, when things happen in your life, they show up in your cycle. It's insane. But this is how it works. It's our most environmentally sensitive system. And I find that often women come to me and they're like, oh, yeah, I'm tracking. I have my Flow app and I'm always 28 days, like clockwork. It always comes exactly when I expect. And they might not realize they're not actually ovulating, or they might be spotting instead of actually having a true period. And we wouldn't know these things because you're not looking for them. This can give a really false sense of confidence no matter your goals. Shayna says 100% my stress is always reflected in my cycle. Yes. Yes, because it's taxing. Like we were talking about before, it's your most environmentally sensitive system. Of course, what's going on in your life is going to affect it. I love that you shared that. Next, we're going to jump into OPKs because this, to my dismay, but to no one's fault, is the pipeline that most people go when they switch to trying to conceive. So if some of these are going to be more fertility specific, but if you're not into fertility just yet, this is going to be so good for you to know, not only for you in the future, if this is the path you decide to take, but for friends, for family. I mean, this is what a lot of people go straight to, is they go to OPKs or ovulation predictor kits. So let's chat about those. So what these are is they're strips that measure the presence of luteinizing hormone, or LH, in your urine. And LH is a true reproductive hormone. It surges about 24 to 36 hours before we ovulate. So, theoretically, or in a very healthy optimal cycle, we would expect to see a high LH reading, so a positive. And that tells you that ovulation is likely to be coming in the next few days. They're accessible, they're pretty cheap, and they give you something tangible. Like you can see, what it looks like when LH levels are highest, and this gives you something to go off of as to where you are in your cycle. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, the bad. The LH surge, as as helpful as they can be, the LH surge does not guarantee ovulation, or this should actually say is actually coming. LH surge can happen multiple times per cycle. An LH surge can happen without being followed by ovulation. It means your body's trying to ovulate. It's spiking the right hormone, but maybe there is some kind of issue where actually ovulation doesn't happen. There's no follow through. And then if you're someone who has a longer cycle, so again, this like over 35 days, maybe you have PCOS or suspected PCOS, what can happen is you get these longer cycles where your body's trying to ovulate multiple times. So really, you would see positive LH multiple times. And you wouldn't know that, because usually you're not like tracking again after you get the positive LH. You wouldn't know that maybe like you saw the positive LH, you say, okay, now I'm in my fertile window, it's go time. You would not know unless you were tracking all the information that that actually was not the event that was preceded by ovulation. It actually happened, 6, 7 days later in your cycle. It also does not going to tell you when the fertile window opened. Just like I said earlier, it's going to tell you ovulation is likely approaching in the next 24 to 36 hours. So, if you're relying on just OPKs to time conception or avoid pregnancy, you could be missing those fertile days before you see that surge thanks to cervical fluid. So, really, if you're making cervical mucus before your LH surge and you're having unprotected sex, like we talked about in the very beginning, this fits the criteria for any sperm that's present, able to survive, able to hang out and live for up to 5 days for fertilization to potentially happen. So the last thing I'll say is it's in the name, predictive. Ovulation predictor kits, OPKs, are predictive. They are not a confirmation of ovulation, nor are they a guarantee it's going to happen. A positive OPK is considered a secondary fertile sign. So again, I have no problem if someone is like, I would actually really like to keep using my LH strips, add that in. Add that in. It's an amazing, more data is better. I'm, a scientist. I love that stuff. So bring it all in. More data is better, but do not take a secondary fertile sign in and use it in the absence of your primary fertile signs because you're going to get so much better and so much more accurate information from the primary fertile signs. And this is kind of a stressful statistic, but the accuracy of these range from 19 to 99%. And I think a lot of this can be due to the fact that they can be really hard to read. Sometimes, if you go on like Reddit threads, there are people just posting tons of pictures of their OPKs. Like, is this positive? Is this a peak? Like, what is happening here? It can be really confusing, which again, we're trying to avoid more stress on the system because of how sensitive our reproductive system is when we're just taxed and stressed out and trying to micromanage and feeling very unsafe in the ways we're doing things or our practices. This is just going to create more stress. And my whole goal is let's make this as stress-free, painless as possible. The ugly side of OPKs too, I just need to always mention this, that because it's sensing a hormone, which under healthy circumstances surges at a specific point in the cycle, this does not mean that there can't be contraindications. So in PCOS, we see chronically elevated LH. Same thing with perimenopause, LH can surge erratically, or when you're taking certain fertility medication, LH can be elevated as well. And that will give you a false positive, which will be A, very confusing, and B, make the strips incredibly unreliable. So next we're going to jump to natural cycles. I guess I'll nicely wrap up OPKs. I'm not against them. I think you should add them in if you're interested to a current method or tracking system that you're using. But would I rely on them ever by themselves? I would not, just for all of those reasons. So natural cycles, full disclosure, I am a natural cycle girl. I don't use it for birth control, but I like the app. I think it's a really nice design. I think what it's trying to do is really noble. Um, but let's dive into the good, the bad, and the ugly about this particular app. So, Natural Cycles is an FDA approved digital contraception tool. Now, the reason it's more advanced, say, than the tracking apps or the OPKs is because it is actually taking information from a primary fertile sign, basal body temperature. Um, if you have a device connection, so like the NC armband, temp drop, aura. So my aura is technically connected to natural cycles. Just do know those are not the same thing. True basal body temperature is when you use the thermometer. What the wearables are doing is it's actually skin temperature change, and it's algorithmically adjusted to turn into a temperature at the level of your natural cycles app. But I am lazy, so I like that. I would always recommend, though, using the true basal body temperature thermometer for at least a few cycles to get a really good understanding of your true baseline. And then you can move into a wearable if that suits your lifestyle better. So the fact that they use BBT is great. We use BBT to confirm ovulation happened. We go back to the very beginning. We only surge progesterone post ovulation. So your temperature is only going to go up after you ovulate. So this is like a retrospective piece of information. This tells you nothing as to if it's coming, only that it happened in the past. So incredibly important distinction. BBT tells you it happened, doesn't tell you it's coming. Oh, I skipped ahead. Natural cycles is really strong at closing the fertile window because of temperature. So really you need at least 3 elevated days in a row of elevated temperature to confirm ovulation. That's what your app is going to be doing. But temperature is useless for opening the fertile window. When natural cycle starts giving you, be it safe or risk days, depending on how you have the app programmed, what they're using to open your fertile window is a predictive algorithm. So the beginning of that fertile window is where the real risk lies, and they have entirely handed that off to math. Kind of also using the rhythm method because it's going to use your past cycle information to dictate when that starts. So the problem with that is it also won't allow you to change the day designation. Is today a fertile day, yes or no, based on if you do see fertile signs. So I have a really interesting case study from myself. Actually, this happened twice now, where you know, I've been doing this work for a very long time. I have quite a healthy cycle, quite a regular cycle. And interestingly, I would have been screwed by natural cycles if I had blindly trusted the algorithm. So they gave me green days, safe days. I was using it for birth control on days where I saw cervical fluid. So I knew that was a fertile day. The app told me it was not a fertile day. And thank God I knew that because if I didn't, that could have set me up for a lot of disaster. You can even see like a lot of these, I don't have time, unfortunately, to break down all these really cool case studies that I've just scoured on Reddit. But here's a really good example of someone who had an earlier ovulation than they normally do. Again, so rhythm method thinking was at play here. And Natural Cycles had to send them an email being like, sorry about your green days. You were given false green days because you ovulated earlier than predicted. So love Natural Cycles, love what it's doing. It's bringing in at least one primary fertile sign that's really valid for closing your fertile window, telling you, A, you ovulated, so yay, your body's functioning optimally. B, it gives you information as to when that happened. But for birth control, would I trust it? No, for that reason right there. And then last, I want to break down the at-home hormone tests. So these are some really fancy devices you may have seen. The two I'll be talking about are Anito and Mira. And what these are is you have these strips that you test your urine with, and then you plug these strips into the device, and they give you an output, so an actual like hormone result level for your major reproductive hormones. So the good is this is essentially, I always say these are kind of like a more advanced version of the work that I do because I teach you how to proxy these things based on your fertile signs. Like your body's going to tell you when your estrogen's high. You're going to know based on things like temperature, if progesterone is high, PMS symptoms, how long is the progesterone sustaining for. We can figure all that out. But this is going to give you an actual lab value, which is really, really cool. And then you can see the graphs across your cycle. So the bad, I guess you could always consider cost to be a huge factor. They're quite expensive. So the devices themselves are a few $100s, and then the test strips are sold separately. So easily, if you're using these devices for, 6 months, 7 months, a year, you could spend thousands of dollars just getting these test strips and using them daily. So there's that. Also, I've seen plenty of Mira graphs where people are like not using it every day because they don't want to use a test strip every single day. And then so you have good data, but it's incomplete because there are days missing. And we know that these hormones are, if you surge LH, like that's going to be on one day. So if you miss that, it's going to be really hard. It might be hard to confirm ovulation if you only have a few, post-ovulatory progesterone measurements. So definitely the benefit would be doing it every single day. Is that the most realistic and practical and cost effective? For a lot of people, no. Also, the numbers without context can really create more confusion. This is my whole beef with like tracking in general, because it can give you a lot of really good information, but the insight, the interpretation, the context, applying it to your body, your medical history, your concerns, your risk tolerance, there's none of that. Like that is the missing piece. The data is the first part, but we really need proper interpretation. And then when you interpret it, what do you do about it? How do you make it better? How do you know if it's actually working? That's the piece that matters the most. And so often I will get clients who have like beautiful, beautiful graphs. They're tracking with these devices, but they genuinely still have no idea. Like they might as well not have been doing it because they're like, I don't know if this is even normal. I don't know if this is optimal. What am I supposed to do if this is abnormal? So that's kind of the crux of the problem with a lot of these things. Also, interestingly, just because this is my own anecdotal, like the ugly section, is I really see often Mira charts where they call the LH surge ovulation day. And I know what they're trying to do because of, again, what we talked about with the OPKs. If you see high LH levels, it's predictive. of ovulation. So if you're trying to conceive, this is a really good indication. You're deep within your fertile window, ovulation is likely coming, so you should try to target this day. But categorically, that's incorrect. LH surge is not ovulation day. LH surge precedes ovulation day. And often ovulation comes after an LH surge, but like we talked about earlier, it does not always. Even if it's typically swiftly followed by ovulation, again, I think this is a total fallacy that causes a lot more confusion, stress, and time wasted if you don't actually know that distinction and you don't actually see the subsequent rise in progesterone that confirmed you did indeed ovulate. So, what actually answers the question, am I fertile every single day? So, the method that I have found to be the most empowering, the most accurate, and the most applicable across all life stages. So, I'm talking for birth control, I'm talking for trying to conceive, I'm talking postpartum, I'm talking perimenopause, is the fertility awareness method. And I don't like to call it fertility awareness method because it's not all about fertility, like I just said. This is so flexible across your entire reproductive life. So there are many types of fertility awareness methods. I kind of didn't name a few earlier, but there are many that are the more religious versions. There are ones that use different fertile signs. There are ones that combine a fertile sign with other pieces of information. So, just so we're super clear, the one I'm going to be talking about today, the one that I'm trained in and use myself, is called the symptothermal method. This is a type of fertility awareness method. And when it comes to birth control, so non-hormonal birth control, we found it to be 99% effective in research at preventing pregnancy. This is a clinically validated method, and the way we break it down is sympto refers to tracking cervical mucus patterns, again, via an external wipe. And then thermal is our basal body temperature information. So these two primary fertile signs proxy your major reproductive hormones. So every day we're getting insight on what your estrogen's doing and what your progesterone may be doing. And we're putting it together. We're essentially using these two hormones. Are they hitting the thresholds they need to be? Are they showing up at the right time per cycle? Are they going down at the right time per cycle? And we can paint such an incredible picture about your health, hormonal balance. That's just what that means. Like, are they surging at the right time, coming down at the right time, and the right ratio to each other? It's like a long way of talking about hormonal balance. And health is like my main focus, but then also, of course, fertility status is what this tells you about too. So when we're tracking and interpreting your cycle data, because I can't say this enough, the data is amazing, but the interpretation of it is really where the money lies. We're looking at sort of six main cycle parameters that give you major reproductive health clues. We're looking at the length and quality of your bleed, so of your period. Do you have any pain? What is the blood volume? Do you have any spotting? What is the color? This is really a really good indicator of health. Your fertile window. So, what is the timing of it? How consistent is it? Are there any abnormalities? Namely, via your cervical mucus patterns. So, is it moving in that basic infertile pattern, we call it, of dry? So, when you're not in your fertile window yet, you shouldn't be making any or you don't see any. Then we have, as we're gaining estrogen closer to ovulation, do we see this shift of maybe the more pasty, whitish cervical mucus transitioning into that egg white, stretchy, lubricative peak we call mucus, and then drying up post ovulation because we have enough progesterone to plug up the cervix? Do we see ovulation happening? And usually it happens between days 10 and day 22 per cycle. So when is it happening? Is it even happening? You'd be amazed. So even if you have this like beautiful clockwork-like cycle that comes whenever you expect you may be ovulating, but do you know that for sure? Luteal phase length. So this is again the time from ovulation to the start of your next period. Is this between 12 and 14 days? So from a health perspective, this is incredible because making enough progesterone means we're unlikely to experience really bad PMS. Um, any symptoms that you can think of that are hormonally driven that happen before your period are usually tied to progesterone insufficiency. Also, if you're looking at it from a fertility perspective, if you don't have a nice, robust 12 to 14-day luteal phase, this is telling us that you don't have enough time to grow a really hospitable uterine lining to be really conducive to supporting, healthy implantation and growth to sustain a pregnancy. So even if conception happens and fertilization's perfect, if you don't have this beautiful, 2 week long, really nice, like nutrient rich, blood rich uterine lining to support that implantation, that's an essential piece of the fertility equation. And then overall cycle length. So healthy, to give you a very clear definition, cycle length is between 24 and 35 days. Any less than 24, worthy of investigation. Anything longer than 35 days, worthy of investigation as well. Even if you don't always have over 35 days. So people will be like, oh, well, sometimes I have a 45-day cycle, but that's rare. Usually it's, 25 to 32 days. And even if, it's an oddball cycle here and there, that still is something you would want to look into because that can indicate hormonal disruption or something that absolutely can be addressed. So the reason we use two primary fertile signs is because we double check them against each other. So you have more confidence in the opening and closing of your fertile window. It also ensures there's no single point of failure. You have multiple data points with clear parameters. And then because of the multiple data points here, like I was saying, all of them correspond to very clear definitions of optimal and normal. And when you work with someone who is trained in this method, we'll be able to tell instantly, like, what are your patterns saying over the course of a few cycles? Do you fall outside of these things? And then give you very, very personalized instructions on, okay, this is how we lengthen that. This is how we see more cervical mucus. And it's also so validating. I think I actually have, all right, so I don't have the before and after, but um, I've shared it in other events where I had this. Actually, I can skip ahead a bit. Um, This is what I call health secrets. So yes, incredibly important for birth control, incredibly important for fertility. But for me, my favorite part about this method is the secrets it tells you about your health. So this is my own data. This was a cycle that I had seen. Um, okay, so well, a few red flags, but I'll point out a couple to you. A short luteal phase. So like I said, this phase from ovulation to next period should be 12 to 14 days. Mine was only 11. Even you could say, ah, Michelle, that's close. It's not optimal, and we can do something about it. So again, this was telling me progesterone was likely insufficient. You don't have to worry about what this means and what it is. Just know this is a cervical mucus notation system. And what this flag is planted on is I was seeing post-ovulatory cervical mucus, which tells me I didn't have enough progesterone to plug up that cervix because stuff was still getting through and I was still seeing, mucus in this phase. So again, pointing to progesterone insufficiency. Um, and then we don't have to get into that one because I want to make sure I have time for all the examples. But then this was actually my cycle after that. So I had done simple tweaks. I mean, usually it's lifestyle, nutrition, some very key supplementation things. And within a cycle or two or three, it's so validating to get that feedback from your body. It's like, oh, wow, I went back to a 12-day luteal phase. Like, wow, that's amazing. Post-ovulatory cervical mucus dried up. Wow, that's amazing. Like that's all it took to really A, have the awareness, B, do something about it, and then C, see how my body clearly responded to those things. Um, Lace is very cool. Yeah, it is very cool. I mean, I love the non-hormonal birth control. I love the fertility stuff, but like this is the coolest part in the world to me. So yeah, I kind of shot ahead, but you guys are all smart. I think you can kind of get the gist that this is the temperature tracking piece. This is part of the method, so that cervical mucus notation system where it looks so crazy right now, I know, but every letter, number, color here has a direct interpretation as to what it means for your health, what the hormonal translation is, and it gives us a very clear, like we're talking about the same thing. Like if I used to be so try to be like a little superhero when I learned this stuff. And try to see if I could go on Reddit forums and just like help people out because people always post their charts and are like, help me figure out what this means. Like, did I ovulate? What does this mean? And after, rigorously studying this and getting trained and getting certified, I realized that if you're not talking about the same thing and you don't have very clear definitions of what the cervical mucus is or what it looks like or what it means and when it happens and, were you actually taking your temperature correctly? What times of days were you doing it? Without that information, the data itself gets so muddy, you really can't interpret it the way that you could if you had very clear rules. So this method, it's entirely user-based, so it's up to you to do it correctly, but there are very clear-cut rules, and if you follow them, you'll know exactly where you are in your cycle. Yes, so you can cycle sync and live in according to your flow, which I love that that's a thing now, but also you'll have the answer. Like, is today a fertile day? Yes or no? No questions about it because your body's telling you. The app, because people always ask me, I know I spent 49 minutes crapping on apps, but there is an app I use with clients, but the thing about it is it's kind of just like an empty Excel spreadsheet. It graphs this beautifully for us, but I put everything in there myself. And I'm making the interpretation of it. There's no insights, there's no algorithm, there's no nothing. It is just you having this ability, but also living in 2026 when we like things to be automated and in apps. So that's what that is. It's called Read Your Body if you're interested. Um, just kind of like a way to put everything in there because I just get questions about that all the time. So putting it all together, okay, ChatGPT made it for me, but I did a pretty good job. All I'm trying to do here is tell you the strengths and weaknesses of all of these different things. So really rough, if you imagine your cycle on a continuum, and this is the fertile window itself with, ovulation happening, and then we close the fertile window after we confirm it did indeed happen. When we're looking at the period tracker apps, what is that telling us? Unfortunately, it's not taking in cervical fluid information. It doesn't use BBT information. So really, it's exclusively relying on said algorithm to tell you where that is. OPKs, what are they doing? Well, you test every day, test every day, test every day to see this LH surge, hopefully the one that is before ovulation for you. Um, but that's what it would be doing is giving you this positive information that tells you ovulation is likely to happen in the next 24 to 36 hours. Natural cycles, incredible at closing your fertile window, telling you, yes, ovulation happened on this day, retroactively, but not so hot at opening it. You have to put a lot of faith in the algorithm, and it has been and is. I have noticed it get more and more conservative over time, probably likely due to the issues that people can have when they trust this and they ovulate on the earlier side. But really, there is no body-led assurance for opening the fertile window with natural cycles. Mira and Anito, I mean, yeah, if you're taking it every single day, this can tell you beautiful information about what your hormones are doing. It's a direct measurement, which is super great, but it does rely on you, having this device, having these strips, testing every day, and then knowing what to do with that information. And then Michelle's method. I didn't tell us to call it this, but yeah, this is the symptothermal method. Okay, I'm not the only one that uses it. I'm not the only one that teaches it. But really, what it is it's opening and closing the fertile window using cross-referenced abilities for both and using your own fertile information, primary fertile signs with both cervical mucus and basal body temperature. So just a few client examples because this is really fun. This was a trying to conceive example. She was previously using Clue to determine her fertile window, so again, entirely predictive. It was massively miscalculating her window because, oh, big surprise, said she ovulated on day 14, which is, I'm trying not to rant because I have 8 minutes left and I want to leave time for questions, but this issue of this day 14 assumption is so pervasive in our culture and in our medical system. Your doctor will predict your due date if you get pregnant of your baby, assuming you ovulated on day 14. So if you ovulate later, they can tell you like, oh, in an early scan, like, oh, your baby looks like it's, a little small for its age, when really you ovulated a week later than day 14. So it's developing right on time, but we're giving women this stress and this concern that's completely unnecessary and completely baseless. Same thing, I had a friend who had a C-section scheduled, and they were scheduling her surgery based on ovulation on day 14 because they were estimating gestation time that way. And she was like, Michelle, I know I was, because she's been learning from me for a while. I tracked, I ovulated this day. It's like a week later. I don't want the C-section now. I want it a week later because that's actually accurate. And had some back and forth with her doctor, and luckily they agreed to it. But just to tell you, this is not innocuous. This is going to affect you at every stage of reproductive life, which is why it's so important for me to just give you this information now, because no one does. Even if I train like medical residents and doctors in this too because they weren't given this information. So I can't even blame them because it's completely an education gap that we're dealing with. But anyway, back to this client. She had this happen too. So she was trying to conceive. She was working with an reproductive endocrinologist as well. They were like, all right, let's test your progesterone levels. Clinical guidance to come in and get a progesterone test is cycle day 21. Why? Because they're assuming you ovulate on day 14. So really, the clinical guidance should be 7 days after ovulation, which is how they get 21. But you can see, thanks to our work tracking together, she actually ovulated on cycle day 21. If she went and got this progesterone test done on that day, it would have looked like it was in the toilet because she hadn't ovulated yet, so she wasn't making progesterone. So, thanks to this, she was able to call her doctor and say, I actually ovulated today, so I'm going to come in like in 7 days and get the actual progesterone test. And they were like, oh, yeah, 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 like, right. So she did that. Levels were great. And this was, I think, a few cycles in, but we had caught like a short luteal phase for her, which we were able to work on, corrected those, and she did conceive the following cycle. And then this was a client who was just, trying to get to know her body better, was using natural cycles, but wanted to really be an active participant and also trust it really more, like a lot more. So she was, regular cycles, healthy cycles, normally ovulated around day 16. But like I said, you can't just say I always ovulate on day 16 and have that be the end of the story, because even though we had been tracking, and yes, she usually was ovulating on day 16. That was her body's, natural set point. She went on a trip in her follicular phase, which, you're not sleeping, you're eating different food. It's a lot of stress on the system. It ended up pushing her ovulation back or forward a few days. She ended up ovulating on day 19. And when you ovulate later, your luteal phase still has that fixed amount of time. So she got her period a few days later than she normally did. Normally did, I say too. And we were talking after the cycle, and she was like, oh my God, I would have been so stressed, like total pregnancy scare, totally freaking out because it came 3 days later. It's never late. But with this, she was able to clearly see, oh no, I experienced the later ovulation because of what was going on in my life earlier on, which is so cool. And a really good example to what we were talking about before. This I showed you the kind of health secrets that you can dig up just from what your body's telling you already. And then I like to leave everyone with a mini mission. So, am I telling you to ditch your app or your favorite method? No, no, I don't want you to do that at all, unless you want to. But my goal is to just make you as informed as possible so that you can make the right decisions for yourself at any stage of life that you're in or going into. So, if you are using something that doesn't have, say, one or more primary fertile signs, see if you can add that in. So I don't, you don't have to start learning the crazy cervical mucus method unless you want to, which I'll talk about in a second. But you can just simply observe the patterns. The first time I did this, like I kind of wrote, I think we all write off cervical mucus as discharge for so much of our life. And then you actually start paying attention to it, and you're like, oh my God, this does come in a pattern. And it is moving in kind of that, you know, increasing estrogen concentration way, and then it does go away. And it's just so crazy to see that that's been happening under our nose the whole time. Or you can also get a basal body temperature thermometer and just start taking your temperature every morning, first thing when you wake up, and see if you do see a sustained thermal rise around ovulation and how does that match up to what your app or tracker is telling you. And then I always say, more data is better. So anything going on in your life, stress, sleep, are you sick? Did you change anything about your diet? Did you start a new supplement? Log that alongside add it to your tracker app or whatever you're using, any symptoms you're experiencing for 2 to 3 months, and see what patterns unfold. Because this is really where we all start with that initial awareness. So if you'd like to learn more or if you have any questions, I know I threw a lot at you in 58 minutes. But you can email me, you can respond to the recording link I'm going to send out. You can drop in my calendar if you want to go to my LinkedIn page. I have my Calendly up there. I do only take one-on-one clients for now, and I have availability starting mid-May. Right now, there are 2 spots available just in case anyone was interested in diving in and learning this for themselves. Whether someone works with me or not, it's not super important to me. I want someone to be informed, well-resourced, and in control. Granted, if you do want to go deeper, I would love that. It's the coolest thing ever. But I simply want you to know what your true options are and make sure that you feel very well equipped to move forward. So, with that, thank you, everyone. Um, I did see a couple questions that if you have to leave one, I completely understand. Like I might stick around for a few minutes if everyone's down, but thank you. I know there's a lot of things you could be doing on your lunch break. So um thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh yeah. Thank you. So question, on the app front, some women's health apps are a bit dubious but persist. What can customers do to educate themselves while also being mindful of how quickly people tend to make decisions, i.e., saw a flashy TikTok, download an app immediately? Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think that's the issue I'm contending with. It's like we see so much and it sounds so good and it looks so pretty, but the long game is what's going to win. And I think just this kind of basic how your body works education is step one. So educating ourselves, telling our friends about it. A really good resource, I'll put it in the chat. It's called The Fifth Vital Sign by Lisa Hendrickson Jack. Oops, I spelled. I'm actually personally trained by Lisa. The method that she talks about in the book is the one that we talked about today. But really, this is an amazing biological starting place for someone who knows nothing about how their body works, who wants to approach, moving away from hormonal birth control or trying to conceive. This is going to give you an amazing primer, and I share this widely. I hope that helps to Michael's question. Thank you. This is so informative. Oh, yes, tell your girlfriends. Oh, that's my favorite thing. We're like the best networkers, so I love that. I see it. Did I see a hand? Feel free to unmute yourself if you have the hand. Um, Question, how can we bring this method confidently with our OBGYN so appointments can be productive? Incredible question. So simply having the tangible information tends to work for some people. So I'll start with that. Because they're going to ask you, like, oh, when was your last menstrual period? And if you have that information, obviously you can get it from your app, then you have that. I don't really know how much deeper they go into that in a typical like wellness visit. If you're having symptoms, I'll tell you, having this is amazing too if you're tracking the symptoms alongside your cycle. So I had a client who had severe PMDD and they were trying to tell her it's psychiatric. 2 to 3 different doctors like would not give her the even like time of day to be like, oh, it's hormonally related. And then when she actually came in and they see that this is only happening 2 to 3 days before her period, then it's a different story. Then it's like, oh, okay, now this is definitely hormonal basis. What can we do about this without writing her off as a purely, psychiatric event? Um, and then, oh yeah, so if you are the person I talked about who you're getting a hard time from your doctor because they're so insistent on using this day 14, so if you're more maybe like the pregnancy, fertility space, what I recommend you do, this is kind of shady, but it's the only workaround I know that truly is, it's foolproof, If they ask you your last menstrual period and it's in the context of calculating a due date or something like that, I want you to tell them the day you conceived. And if you're tracking your cycle, this is going to be really easy for you to find out. Um, so that would be your ovulation day minus 14 days. So essentially, like if they're trying to use it to calculate a due date if you get pregnant, like know your ovulation day. And when they ask you last menstrual period, say that day minus 14 days because that's what they're going to use. Um, thank you for the session. Oh, thank you. That's so kind. Um, let me know if anyone else has any questions. Please feel free, reach out to me. I don't want to keep you too long, but you guys are so great and ask such really good questions. So I appreciate it. And with that, I will give you the rest of your Wednesday back. And you guys are so welcome. Oh my gosh, you're welcome. Thank you so much.